My name is Luke Hammond, acting gravedigger at St. Barrow Cemetery, an old burial ground deep in rural Georgia, 12 miles from the main road and half a mile from a swamp that breathes fog even in summer. I never believed in ghost stories, at least not more than was necessary to keep the curious away from the headstones at night, but there are noises that aren't wind, sinkholes that aren't just rain, and a kind of silence that weighs differently when it comes from underground. The afternoon it all began. The sun was far too high for a place made for shadows. The asphalt on the access road burned, and the faded plastic flags marking the old plots flicked in the air with a dry crackle. I was filling in for the old grave luthier, Mr. Dalton, sidelined by a mild stroke. It was my third day. I already knew the section names: Soldiers Row, Hillcrest, Willow Bend. And the problem area: North Vale Plot G3, 7 ancient graves and a low granite mausoleum the map calls the Gartrell Mausoleum, though the town's elders prefer its unwritten nickname, The Breath. The call had been simple: sinkhole in G3. I brought the soil probe, shovel, post-hole digger and a sack of lime. As I rounded the row of leaning headstones, I saw it from a distance. The O'Rourke family grave, 1918, 1923, 1931, 3 dates packed tight, had sunk in the middle as if the ground had inhaled. Beside it, another stone, almost its twin, threw me off with something worse. In the straight noon sun, its shadow quivered, like water was moving beneath it. I tipped back my hat, knelt, and pressed my fingers into the dry turf. The hollow underneath echoed like a barrel. I tried again, closer to the center, empty, deep, elastic, like a drumhead stretched under dirt, and then I felt it. Vibration. Faint, steady, like the purr of a machine, or the tremor of something alive pushing air through a tight tunnel. Cave in, I told myself, trying to nail down a word my nerves would obey. Armadillo Burrow, drainage. But the swamp around here doesn't make voids like this, not in perfect alignment with the 4 oldest stones in the row. To be sure, I drove the probe in. First clay, then nothing. The metal went a full hand deeper than it should, and a damp breath rose up the shaft. Warm, sweet, with a smell I'd only met years ago, visiting a reptile center. Faint ammonia, leather, and a trace of rodent. I pulled the probe out slowly. By reflex, I glanced at the Gartrell Mausoleum. Low build, 4 steps up to a wrought iron door, small stained glass windows on the sides, a stone roof that swells with heat under the sun. On the gate, faded ribbons and 2 coins. Someone's offering, maybe. People make up disasters, I muttered, trying to quiet the unease. But the town didn't invent the warning posted on the tool shed: do not open Gartrell without county authorization. I circled the sinkhole, measuring it with my tape for a controlled fill. That's when I heard it. A short, dry sound, something hard scraping stone under the soil. Imagine the muffled drag of a broom handle across concrete, but deep, like it's echoing under a church floor. 1 scrape, then another. 3 in total, each spaced the same. 3 knocks. My heart kept the same rhythm, and my mind jumped to an image that wasn't mine. A head brushing the ceiling of a tunnel. I clicked my radio to call the cemetery office. Static. Switched to the town channel. Static. The place seemed allergic just then to any human voice that wasn't a whisper. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The St. Barrow Hill always kills a bar or two, nothing unusual, but here in G3, nothing at all, as if a heavy cloth had been thrown over the nearest tower. I knelt again. The grass had a woven pattern, like someone had dragged a rug underneath in a ring, opening a path with their body. The pattern repeated in wide arcs between stones and ended at the mausoleum's concrete base, where dirt clung to the stone edges as though splashed upward from below. This wasn't erosion. I crouched at the mausoleum's iron door. From inside came cold air, the smell of old flowers, wax and whetstone. In the side window, dust was traced with prints of hands and claws, not human, slashing diagonally from within, the kind of marks you expect in a bad movie. I touched the gate, cold as ice, and then came the sound that since that day has never left my body. Not a rattle, not a hiss, a long deep sigh made with imaginary lungs, rising from the floor as if the whole building breathed. It came through the iron, rattled the stained glass, made the faded ribbon tremble. The door exhaled air with the same smell as the hollow under the graves, warm, alive, humid, with the dust of an ossuary. I stepped back and, without thinking, put my foot on the sunken grave. The turf sank 2 inches, and under my boot, something displaced air, not water shifting, not loose soil, a passage. The grave slab floated up and settled again. I nearly fell. That was the exact moment old Pastor Coleman appeared, leaning on the perimeter's iron fence, hat in hand, wearing an expression halfway between pity and scolding. He lives in the yellow house across the road and shows up whenever someone talks too loud in the yard. "Don't push your luck, son," he said, no mockery in his voice. "That ground there doesn't want your weight." "Mr. Coleman." I straightened my shirt, trying to salvage a posture I didn't feel. "I think there's a cavity under G3, The word betrayed me. "A tunnel." He looked over my shoulder at the guardrail, not at the sinkhole. "Always has been," he said. "No one set that mausoleum there without knowing where the thing passes." The phrase dropped in my head like an empty can. The thing passes. Not a metaphor, a map feature. "You're saying there's an animal under the graves?" I already knew the answer but needed to hear it. Not an animal. He tapped his fingers on the wooden fence 3 times, in the same rhythm I'd heard from the ground. A custom. "At night, don't stay here, and if you do, don't put your ear to the ground." "What's in there, Pastor?" He didn't answer. Took 2 steps, pointed to the side window of the mausoleum where the dust marked what I'd thought was a scratch. "That's from someone who got curious. Nobody scratches from the inside." "You ever been in?" "Me? No. My father, yes. Came back with bad hearing and a fear too big to fit in a pocket." He adjusted his hat. "Listen to me. Call the county, fill what sank with coarse, dry gravel, not soil, and if you hear the sigh, let it answer." "Answer what?" He made the oldest sign in the south, touched his chest with 2 fingers, the brim of his hat, his inside pocket. "That we know it's alive." When I was about to reply, the radio on my belt screamed a burst of static. I pressed the button. "St. Barrow, office, do you copy?" Denise's voice from the front desk came broken, but it came. "G3, report. People asking about the Gartrell." The transmission cut there, as if the word had a price, then only humming. I took a deep breath, decided to mark the perimeter as off-limits, leave the fill for tomorrow and come back with authorization to open the mausoleum. Not that I wanted to, but some jobs, if you don't do them, the town thinks you've lost your nerve. While I was staking flags and posts, nails biting into old wood like footnotes in a forbidden book, I noticed something the bright light had hidden. 3 headstones in the row had packed dirt lines running from them in a perfect arc to the mausoleum's base, like dry rivers converging on the same bay. And beneath the short grass of those lines, a hum, not of insects, but of friction, leather against dust, the subcutaneous sound of something large shifting sides to sleep. I got the cart to head back to the shed. Passing through the east gate, the one that creaks, a woman I often saw, Mrs. McCrae, who brings flowers to her sister every Saturday, stopped me with an outstretched arm. "You heard it, didn't you?" She didn't ask, "Which sound?" "They breathe more in the heat." "They? The ones who saw the serpent?" She pointed toward the mausoleum without looking. "Around here, we learn to name things in ways that don't make echoes." Before I could fish some humor from that, 3 sharp knocks traveled through the main path's ground beneath my feet, striking the cart's wheel as if they'd climbed up the metal. I froze. Mrs. McCrae just tightened her grip on the bouquet, said, "They like a warning," and walked off too fast for someone who'd been coming here since girlhood. I went back to the office with the physical sense the yard was watching my back. Denise was waiting with a form. "County wants to know what's different." I wrote what could go on paper: sinkhole cavity, probable erosion from an old drain. I didn't write about the sigh. I didn't write about the 3 knocks. I didn't write about the warm smell. "You going to open the Gartrell?" Denise asked, eyes still on the paper. "Only with the county here, and with the pastor if he wants to stand at the fence telling me not to go in." "And you? Will you go in?" I looked at the window where the plastic flags trembled in a wind I couldn't feel on my skin. The job goes in. I'll go with it. She breathed in a way that was neither a laugh nor fear. Then be back early tomorrow. County's here at 8. I signed off on the spreadsheet, shut down the shed's lights and crossed the parking lot, leaving through the iron gate with the distinct feeling I was leaving a working set of lungs behind me. On the road, my car radio stuck to static for 3 miles. On the first station signal before the music, I heard 3 little clicks. I tried to find sense in the coincidence. Failed. That night at home, I didn't sleep. The AC hum sounded like the soil in G3. The memory of the sigh rose through my bedroom ceiling. I saw myself again at the mausoleum's gate, feeling on my face the warm air of something that lives in the hollow and has all the time in the world. When the clock blinked 2:13, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. On the other end, no voice, just 3 taps, evenly spaced, metal against some empty place. I hung up. My apartment breathed slowly, in sync with a graveyard I had locked outside. At 7:40, I was already on the road, my stomach knotted in cold sweat. A kettle of vultures circled over the strip of swamp. The sun, dulled by distant wildfire smoke, looked like a tarnished coin. When I drove through the cemetery gates, I saw the county car pulled up, 2 people in safety vests waiting, an inspector with a clipboard, a tech with a measurement kit. Behind them, Pastor Coleman, hat in hand, and 2 volunteers who liked to look useful at events like this. The caution tape in G3 fluttered, as if something was blowing from underneath. I walked up with the big Gartrell key in my pocket, heavy as a decision. Denise caught up to me with an envelope of historical photos of the section. "You'll want to see this first," she said, serious. On top, a black and white from 1919, men in suspenders, hard faces, posing beside the freshly aligned mausoleum. In the corner, a child staring straight into the lens. The penciled caption read, "Inaugurated over the old corridor." Someone, a century ago, had named what the pastor called a custom corridor. The inspector nodded to me. "Shall we open it?" he asked, neutral. The city noise vanished. The whole yard seemed to tilt its head. The key scraped against old iron. The lock resisted like the bones of an arm that didn't want to leave its socket. I turned it twice, pushed. The door gave an inch, then caught. The pastor only said, "With respect." The tech braced it. I pushed again, and the darkness inside moved like dark water in an old tank. The first gust of warm air that came out had a sound, half sigh, half sand running through a pipe. I had no way of knowing, but I knew the old corridor was alive, and the thing that breathed down there had heard the key. We stepped into the Gartrell, stained glass, scratched from the inside, old photos revealing the corridor's map, and the sound of something brushing beneath the graves when the light goes out. Subscribe to Serpent Shadows so you don't miss the rest of this descent, because from here on, the cemetery answers when you call. The Gartrell door opened like breaking an ancient bone, not with a crash but with a deep hurt. The first warm breath came dense, damp, and brought with it the smell of what the earth keeps when it doesn't want to give it back. Old wax, limestone dust, dead flowers and something animal. Low ammonia, leather, matter washed and dried too many times in a time that isn't ours anymore. The county inspector looked at me over his clipboard and made a brief gesture. "I should go first since it's your section." I didn't want the honor, but the job pushed me a step forward. The flashlight cut the dark, revealing a narrow hall, 2 low columns, granite walls with moisture stains in the shape of continents, the floor sunken in the middle, 2 inches lower, a drop not shown in the archive drawings. On the right, 3 sealed niches. On the left, 2 niches and a small stained glass window. And it was the window that caught me. Inside the opaque glass, trails of swept dust in diagonal slashes like claws, but not human, dragging the design over and over from the center outward. The marks were old, but the edges weren't. There was fresh dust along their outlines, as if someone or something had made the same gesture just last week. "No touching until we've mapped," the tech said, already setting the gas meter near the floor. The device chirped numbers I couldn't make sense of, but her face showed no alarm. Low oxygen. Nothing extreme. Don't overexert. Pastor Coleman stayed in the doorway, a shadow in a hat against the pale light outside, repeating almost under his breath, "With respect." He said it like a man reminding you the ceiling can hear. The inspector pointed at the depression. "There," I pointed back. The sag in the floor made a perfect oval before the small maintenance hatch at the far end, a square slab with thin mortar at the corners. I thought corridor before I did any calculation. The word fit my mouth, as if the story had come ready-made from another century. The tech examined the hatch, an old latch, a lead seal with the county's rusted stamp, 1958. No one had opened it officially in over half a century. But the mortar in the corners had hairline cracks, recent, like a letter resealed by a mailman tired of delivering it. "Let's document the graves outside before opening," I suggested, forcing sensibility. The inspector agreed. We left the hall with tape crisscrossing the open doorway and an air sensor on the floor chirping low like an electronic cricket. Outside, North Vale looked like another cemetery entirely under the soft 8 a.m. sun. Even so, the caution tape I'd left the afternoon before still fluttered, as if something was blowing from beneath. Denise caught up to us with the envelope of historical photos. We spread them on the low wall. 1919 and 1926 images showed the Gartrell newly set in place. One detail jumped out. Under the structure, a dotted pencil line labeled "Former Drainage Corridor" toward the marsh. Another photo from 1933 showed men with shovels in a perpendicular trench. On the back, someone had written, "The diversion won't hold. The old path complains." The tech photographed the papers. The inspector muttered something about unstable substructure, but my hands, without asking permission, touched the photo like someone touching a window. We returned to the hall. The temperature had risen a little, not much, just enough for the sweat on my neck to announce itself. The tech wedged wood shims on either side of the maintenance slab, and the inspector broke the lead seal with pliers that felt almost ceremonial. When the hatch lifted half an inch, the air from below answered, not with wind, but with a sigh that didn't pass through a throat. I heard the pastor hold his breath at the door. I did the same. "Lift it slowly," the tech said. We did. The dark rectangle opened like a blind eye. The flashlight went down first. Rough stone steps coated in dust, descending 3 flights to meet a narrow brick corridor, its floor not dirt but paved slabs, now cracked in places. There were marks along the edges, not tool marks, long parallel scrapes, as if something broad and heavy had passed 1,000 times, dragging its own body in rhythm. The patterns looked like tracks, not of iron, but of skin. "Don't go down," the tech said firmly. "Camera first." She attached a long shaft endoscope with a cable and portable monitor. The tiny lens dropped into the opening and slid through the air, projecting the corridor for us like a vein mapped under skin. We pushed the camera 4 or 5 meters, every foot the same, walls with dark stains, the paved floor, and now and then deposits of dried translucent leather. Not human skin, but sheddings. Long, unbroken sheddings clung to recesses like trophies. The tech prodded one with the tip of the shaft. The fiber cracked with the smallest sound, which the camera cruelly magnified on the speaker. "This," she began. "I know what it is," I answered, but my voice didn't make it out. The pastor whispered from the doorway, "They saw the serpent," and the phrase no longer sounded like folklore. 2 more meters in, the corridor widened at an elbow. The camera turned, and then the sound came from the real world, not the screen. 3 sharp knocks measured from beneath us, climbing through the granite, rattling the tripod's metal. The inspector and I locked eyes, not sure where to put our hands. The tech kept the camera steady. On the screen, something passed out of focus, not a whole body, just a shadow that took dust with it and left behind a shift in air that blew a thread of web from the wall. The light adjusted, and where there had been nothing before, there was now a pattern in the dust, an incomplete figure 8, like something had turned on its own axis before moving on. "Seal it," the inspector said, professional. "This section can't take human access without full containment." His heart was saying, "Close it." but the clipboard was saying protocol. The tech agreed. We began to back away, but the corridor answered first, not with attack, not with retreat, but with breathing. The air rose in pulses, as if something down there was using the shift to inhale and exhale faster, syncing with our fear. The flashlight grazed the walls, revealing high marks near shoulder height, scratches in the stone, some fresh, as if hard scales had scraped across the corners. The beam flickered, and it wasn't my hand, it was the air. "Close it," the inspector repeated, this time without the clipboard. The slab dropped a hand's breadth. The sigh answered in equal measure. We pushed further. When the cover settled, the whole hall let out a single exhalation, warm as if the mausoleum were returning what it had borrowed. Silence. The tech collected dust samples from beneath the stained glass. Inside the glass, the marks called to me like a bite that refuses to heal. I stepped forward twice and pressed my ear against it, not out of courage, but out of stupidity. The stone beneath the glass had the sound of a full belly, hollow with a slow movement, a crumbling of sand that didn't go anywhere, just shifted place. And behind that noise, something smaller, repeated, like the tapping of a bone tip on stone. 3 pause, 3 pause. "Don't do that," the pastor said, never raising his voice. I pulled back like I'd just burned my ear on a forgotten stove. The inspector stepped outside to call his supervisor. The tech wrote, labeled with a care her mouth couldn't put into words. I stayed in the hall, arms without a purpose, looking at the sealed slab as if it were the only stopper in a bathtub full of things without names. The pastor, still in the doorway, said to me, not to anyone, "The corridor knows when you don't know," and it seemed the most honest explanation of the day. Outside, the volunteers put up more tape, as if tape were a language that could convince what lies below to stay on its own side. Denise appeared with a cup of water and eyes that asked before her mouth. "Well?" I didn't say serpent, didn't say shedding, didn't say breathing. I said what fit. There's a corridor, and the corridor moves. The county decided. Seal the maintenance hatch, close off the section, bring in the morning a geophysics team with GPR, ground-penetrating radar, and a wildlife consultancy. Translation: tomorrow the place will be crawling with people, and nothing will be opened today. The inspector sealed the hatch with resin and new lead. The tech set vibration sensors, 3 saucer-sized discs on the floor in the hall's corners. Each emitted a gentle beep once per second that blended with the older sound of the place, low breathing. When we left, the sun was already biting at our necks. The Gartrell's shadow fell thin across the sunken grave, and in that strip, the grass shifted sideways as if something passed beneath, brushing the dirt, leaving a furrow like an oar in shallow water. Nobody spoke. The pastor removed his hat and made the small gesture, 2 fingers to chest, brim, pocket. The volunteers understood that working in silence is sometimes the only prayer possible. On my way to the office, Mrs. McCrae reappeared, without flowers this time, only an envelope. "For you," she said, placing in my hands a folded photograph from 1974, a group of teenagers sitting on the North Vale wall, all laughing except one. A thin boy with his ear wrapped in gauze. On the back, the note read, "Don't put your ear to the ground when they're awake." Signed, Coleman Jr., the pastor, 40-some years younger. My stomach turned to cold water. The afternoon passed in nervous bureaucracy. I called the administrator, updated the report, locked the shed, checked the tapes, wrote on the notices. Section closed. Subsidence risk. At 5 p.m., the city took the living home. I locked the gate with the physical sensation the yard was asking me to stay. I didn't. I crossed the road. The swamp exhaled a low mist that painted the asphalt with milk, and late vultures cut the sky like commas. At home, I washed a dust from my arm that didn't all come off, took a long shower that didn't remove the whole smell, sat in my chair and tried to eat dinner with the TV talking about things that don't include ancient corridors. At 7:12 p.m., the phone buzzed. Denise. The sensors in the Gartrell registered 3 abnormal sequences at 6:47, 7:03, and 7:09. Triple pulse 7 seconds. Inspector asked me to tell you. I replied received with fingers that wouldn't obey. tried to fake normalcy, failed. By 9 p.m., when the hum of my air conditioner had become identical to the one in the hall, I knew I wouldn't sleep. I grabbed the flashlight, the spare gate key, the radio, and went back. I did it like committing a reckless act with no witnesses. The asphalt was damp, the air still, and the moon, a coin bitten by cloud, lit the flags poorly. I opened the gate carefully, so as not to offend anything. The sensors blinked their lazy green light across the yard. The guardrail was in its place, it always was, but didn't look still. It looked anchored to something that moved. I went in. The hall was exactly as we'd left it, with tape across the door and the vibration sensor on the floor blinking its gentle beep. The air was warmer. I aimed the flashlight at the sealed slab, intact. At the stained glass, the slanted marks had taken on a sheen of new dust. I placed my hand on the granite and felt, not a tremor, a pulse. 5, 6 seconds of nothing. Then 3 quick beats, like the heart of another species adjusting its chest. I froze. The radio on my belt on a dead channel crackled into unwanted life. 3 soft clicks, maybe interference, maybe the universe mocking, and then silence. I breathed carefully, as if my air could take the place of something else's. "I know," I said quietly, "to no one and to everything. I know you're alive." It wasn't a request, nor a challenge. It was an answer to the pastor's instruction, to the penciled century, to the corridor that moves. When the words left me, the sound I already knew followed. A sigh rising from the mausoleum floor, threading through the joints, reaching the gate, touching my face. Warm, not wind, presence. I stepped back and accidentally knocked the flashlight against the column. The beam faltered, went out. Darkness swallowed me whole for 3 endless seconds. In that void I heard beneath the hall the dry scrape of scale on stone, scratching like a stiff bristled brush. 1 long stroke, then another, then 3 knocks. The flashlight came back on by itself, trembling in my hand, and gave me back the stained glass. Inside, in the dust, was a new pattern that hadn't been there before, a wide curve, a closed figure 8, and a thin tail pointing to the door. I understood the message the way you understand a brake light isn't decorative. I left, locked the gate from the outside with the auxiliary latch, crossed the yard without running so it wouldn't look like flight, locked the cemetery gate, and only once on the asphalt did I breathe with my whole chest. In the car I turned on the radio I'd hated since the night before, wanted light music, got static for 5 seconds. Then some random station faded in with a host saying, "Breathe with me." I laughed, nervous. I didn't breathe along. I drove home hearing my suspension make 3 little taps as I passed the same patched spot in the road, as if the world had decided to speak to me in the same language, always. I could say I slept. I could say I never went back, but it wouldn't be true. The next morning the GPR team would arrive, and the county, the town, the pastor, everyone would see on the screen what the 1919 photos had penciled: the corridor beneath the yard, a road under the road, with ridges and curves and chambers where the earth refuses to fill. And in those chambers on the paved floor, a collection of shed skins, aligned, belonging to no museum, and among the radar's grey lines, a zone where the signal breathes, up, down, up, as if the ground itself had lungs. But that's tomorrow. Today what I know is what I felt in the bones of my ear and the skin of my hand. Beneath the sunken grave, behind the glass scratched from within, there is an old custom that hasn't ended. There is something that passes and breathes and answers when you say, "I know." The radar opened the corridor's map. The cemetery spoke in every direction, and the first official attempt to close a passage ended with a reply coming from beneath 3 headstones at once. And you're already subscribed to Serpent Shadows, right? From here on, every step on the grass could call to something that never stopped listening. I arrived before the geophysics team, with coffee far too bitter and the sense that the night had been nothing more than a smudged border between 2 identical days. The fog over the swamp seemed lower, as if someone had pulled a sheet down by the edge. At 7:28 a.m., the white truck with the GPR pulled in. 2 radar antennas packed in a metal case, a rugged monitor, and a wide-wheeled tripod built to roll over turf without sinking. Also with them, a wildlife biologist and a county agent with a clipboard, and that calm that usually breaks at the first noise protocol can't explain. Priority, strip G3 and the guardrail perimeter, the geophysicist said, cap pulled low over tired eyes. Then, transects every 2 meters out to Willow Bend. If the voids are continuous, we map the whole corridor. If they're isolated chambers, we handle them case by case. I pushed the GPR cart along the first line, the monitor returning grey slices with bands, hyperbolas and shadows, noise to the untrained, stories to those who learn to listen. Every 2 steps the geophysicist marked GPS points where the anomalies peaked. Here, a shallow cavity. There, a deep oval void, like a sideways hourglass. When we passed the O'Rourke family stone, the monitor traced a single unbroken stripe running straight toward the base of the mausoleum. The geophysicist tapped the screen with his pen. Corridor, continuous. Depth? I asked. Starts at 70 centimeters, drops to 1.8 meters in the central stretch, rises again to 90 centimeters near the guardrail. He looked at me. This path isn't random. It was dug, maintained, used. The word maintained hurt like an old truth. We followed the line to the mausoleum's east wall. There, the radar spat out a different anomaly, a large chamber 3.2 by 2.7 meters at the same depth as the corridor. The geophysicist zoomed in. A room. His expression hardened. And look at this, extrusions on the floor. He cranked the contrast, and we saw something like thin blades scattered, the signature of elongated, lightweight objects, skins. Not 1 or 2, many. The biologist, who until now had been watching with a politely skeptical eye, turned his head slowly, like a man finally accepting that doubt has a body. If there's shedding at that scale, the presence is long-term. Years, maybe generations. The county agent wrote it down, each letter like a sentence. Close sections G3 to G5. Request herpetology consult. Ban access after 1800 hours. We ran transects westward, and with every pass the corridor sketched its whim beneath the grass. A spine with ribs branching in opposite directions. In 3 spots, the radar returned the same chamber with extrusions pattern. When we plotted them on a map, the chambers formed a perfect triangle pointing toward the guardrail like ancient arrows. The geophysicist exhaled. Whoever started this knew how to draw. He narrowed his eyes. Or followed a design that was already there. At 9:12 a.m., as we marked the peak points with stakes, the vibration sensor in the mausoleum's hall beeped differently, a quick pulse overriding its usual steady interval. Yesterday's tech wasn't here. Another, new to the job, was monitoring via tablet and called out, "Anomalous series, 3 pulses, 6 seconds. He's moving," the biologist said, with the unsettling casualness of someone describing a river. Then came the 3 knocks. Not on the guardrail's door, not on its roof. From the ground beneath 3 different stones, O'Rourke 1918, Brody 1921, Reeves 1930, in a sequence that made the air lose its hurry. Tock, 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 in perfect sync. All of us stopped. The geophysicist glanced at the screen. At the exact second of the knocks, spikes in displacement under each of those stones, as if something had struck with the side of its body, marking its presence. It's communication, the biologist guessed quietly. Territorial, maybe, or a response to external vibration. You pushed the cart at a steady pace, it answered in rhythm. It? I asked, noting the singular, as if the corridor belonged to a single lineage. The biologist didn't answer. We decided to pause the mapping and record audio. We placed 2 contact mics on the headstones and a directional mic at the mausoleum's gate. The geophysicist continued 2 more GPR lines, proposing a test. Walk the cart with a different step cadence, slow, then fast, and see if there was call and response. Slow pace, nothing. Fast, 3 knocks again, now with shorter intervals. The biologist wrote it down, eyes fixed. He understands frequency. Pastor Coleman appeared, as he always did when the yard had something to say. He leaned on the fence, hat against his chest, and watched without intruding. I went over to him. "The corridor speaks, Pastor." "It's always spoken," he replied. "Old graves listen better." "You said they saw the serpent yesterday," I reminded him. "What did they see?" He looked over my shoulder to the Gartrell's shadow leaning like a hull. "Something that knows how to breathe for the both of us, and knows how to lie down without breaking the dead." I didn't ask for a translation. The ground vibrated against my ankles. At 10:03 a.m., the county's sensible plan: seal the Gartrell from the inside with reinforced slab and expanding foam around the critical graves. The geophysicist plotted the injection points on his tablet. The agent radioed the works team. Before the cement, though, they wanted to lower the endoscope one more time through the maintenance hatch, still sealed, just through the inspection slit the tech had left. The camera went in, made 3 meters, turned at the elbow, and the world, for a second, grew colder. On the screen, out of focus until it caught the plane, appeared the end of something that was neither stone nor wood. Rough, dark, with diamond shapes dulled by dust, and as thick as a man's thigh. The lens sharpened, and I saw the detail that hasn't left me since. Small fresh abrasions on the scales, as if sandpaper had scraped them yesterday. The camera trembled. The operator pulled back a centimeter. The wall left without hurry, not fleeing, but with ownership. And in the dust it left an unmistakable sign, a complete tilted figure 8, and a rake of a thinner tail that seemed to point the way back to the Gartrell. "Seal it," the agent said, clipped. The inspector agreed. Resin fresh lead tape. The hatch became a border again. The hall's temperature rose by a notch on the thermometer. The air again returned a sigh. The geophysicist's flashlight died and came back, like yesterday's. Outside, the works crew brought a manual auger and cans of expanding plant-based foam to test a controlled fill in the lateral voids, away from the main chambers. They marked a safe spot, cut away 20 centimeters of turf, and inserted the injector tip. First compression, the foam went down. Second, the hose vibrated as if someone on the other side had taken hold of it. Third, the 3 knocks returned, not beneath us, but in an arc around us, like a warning. The auger operator, a man who laughs at his own shadow, went pale. He pulled the tool out without being told. "Plan B," the agent said, voice so firm it almost didn't fit in the word. "No injection without wildlife containment. Full closure. Get a court order. Call the state herpetology reference." We pulled the test stakes, retreated the perimeter. The geophysicist powered down the GPR gently, like pressing an ear to a belly. The morning leaned toward noon, and the yard seemed to watch our withdrawal. In the shadow of the willows at Willow Bend, the plastic ribbons curled faintly like tired tongues. The biologist came to me holding a piece of shed between 2 acetate sheets. It was translucent, faintly golden, with large, wide scales. "This is not from a copperhead nor a rat snake, and it's certainly not Crotalus," he exhaled. "Shed from a large viperid." He looked up. "That's not native here." "And yet it's from here," I replied, feeling the weight of the phrase in my diaphragm. "At least now it is." The agent took the fragment, sealed it in a numbered evidence pouch. The protocol ground on like a mill wheel. Photos, reports, official letters. I walked to the grave that had sunk first, knelt and placed my palm on the grass. The barrel hollow was still there, but with a difference. The pulse had a slower cadence. Sated, tired, territory restored. I don't know. That's when we heard what no one expects to hear in a cemetery at noon, a low chorus like a deep wind, coming from the direction of the swamp, pushing the air in waves. It wasn't water. It wasn't a vehicle. The geophysicist lifted his head. The biologist narrowed his eyes. The pastor made the old sign. "Rain coming?" I guessed. "It's coming down," the pastor answered vaguely. In the hall, the sensors registered 3 spikes in sequence. The O'Rourke, Brody, and Reeves headstones returned the knocks in unison, and for the first time the Gartrell's base gave a faint rasp, not rusted iron scale on polished stone. The agent, who doesn't step in supernatural matters, gripped her clipboard like a talisman. "That's enough for today," she declared. speaking as a person, not an institution. Everyone outside the fence, lock the gate, set up radio watch. We'll be back tomorrow with more hands. I nodded, counted the people like taking roll in a classroom. We locked the guardrail from the outside, tape crisscrossed new padlock. We closed the cemetery gate. The yard was closed, but not empty. Nothing here is empty. On the road, the GPR truck gave 3 knocks with its suspension over the same patch where my car had knocked yesterday. I laughed without humor. The pastor walked slowly toward the yellow house, hat in hand. Denise sent me a message with a screenshot from the hall sensor. 3 spikes, 6 seconds, 6-6. I replied with a dry received. I stopped at the store, bought bread, milk, a candle without knowing why. At home, I washed my arms again, this time as ritual, lit the candle. The phone rang at 2:37 p.m. Denise. The administrator wants you here early tomorrow. Outsiders are coming and... She hesitated. The contact mics picked up something strange. She sent the file. I put on headphones, heard grass, distance, the shuffle of an insect. Then clear as water in a glass, 3 knocks. Pause. A long sigh without a throat. And at the end, the thing you only hear when your ear decides to be cowardly, a light scrape drawing a figure 8 on the wood of the headstone from underneath. The 8 is always the 8. I hung up. I didn't pray. I just stayed still, listening to my fridge trying to sound like something else. When night fell and I promise I didn't go looking for it, the apartment ceiling popped 3 times in the same rhythm. Could be wood, could be thermal expansion, could be the language the corridor teaches slowly until you repeat it without realizing. Could be that too. Tomorrow, the county will try to seal a path that doesn't want to be sealed. They'll come with foam, slabs, mesh, arguments. The radar will return pretty hyperbolas. The biologist will ask for respect. The pastor will say, with respect again. And I, coward and stubborn, will be there with the key in hand because the work enters before the courage does. Tonight at midnight, when the town pretends to sleep, I know North Vale will inhale and exhale like an ancient chest, and the guardrail will answer the corridor's knocks. And if anyone presses their ear to the ground out of bravado, they'll hear what I heard, not ghosts, not souls, not voices, just life. A life that moves beneath what we build to forget that we too breathe earth. The county tries to seal the corridor. The cemetery sends back an answer. And the breath leaves a signature no one can erase. Not from the map, not from us. Subscribe to Serpent Shadows, so you don't miss the conclusion. The next part closes the cycle and leaves the sound of the 3 knocks where silence usually lives. I arrived too early, and still it felt late. The fog sat at knee level, as if someone had drawn a line where the swamp's breath wanted to live. The county crew arrived in convoy, truck with a drilling mallet and expanding foam, a dump bed full of dry gravel, a dozen steel plates, barricades, chains. Also, 2 herpetologists with containment crates, handling hooks, acrylic tubes, and a clinical calm that lasts only until the first noise that doesn't fit the manual. Today's plan, the agent said firmly, tapping the clipboard with her fingertip. Seal peripheral microvoids with plant-based foam, reinforce the surface with steel plates, continuous monitoring of vibration sensors, final endoscope pass for evaluation. Nobody opens the corridor slab, not 1 centimeter. She looked at me like locking the door and handing over the key. Agreed? Agreed, I said, and felt the word drag down my shoulder. The geophysicist fired up the GPR for one last safety sweep. The map on the monitor gave back the corridor's spine under G3 and, to the guardrail's left, the larger chamber, the room where the skins gleam like thin pages in the dark. The older herpetologist, McDougall, tilted his head. This has been in use a long time, he said, studying the image. If you try to fill it all at once, the pressure will push to the weak point. He won't want to die crushed. He'll look for air. He, again singular. I didn't correct it. The corridor doesn't care for grammar. We placed the steel plates like ancient shields over ground that doesn't like surprises. The auger operator picked the first safe point on the far edge from the mausoleum, 2 meters from the O'Rourke stone. Marked it with spray paint, drove the bit in. The metal bit the soil, humming low. The tip went down 20 centimeters, then 20 more. The man with the bucket fitted the foam injector, and I realized, with the part of my brain still thinking, that all of us were holding our breath at the same time. First trigger, the foam went down like obedient whipped cream. Second, the hose buzzed in my forearm bone. Not pump force, something down there pulling back half a handspan and pressing in again. Third, 3 knocks, almost polite, ran in an arc beneath the steel plates, both greeting and warning. The operator choked on a nervous laugh, shut it down without orders, and stepped back 2 boots. Plan B, the agent said, but it sounded like the phrase was split in 2, each half wrestling with its own fear. No injection, surface reinforcement, full closure, and, she breathed, state-level invasive fauna consult. The younger biologist, Alvarez, asked to collect a sample of the foam that barely went in. He rolled up his pant leg, knelt, and when he touched the metal to the hole's edge, the turf shifted a centimeter to the right, slow, deliberate, like the ground had an itch. Alvarez swallowed hard, smiled to save face. "Soft ground," he said, lying only to himself. We set the plates and barricades in a ring of respect. 3 rows, a walking corridor left empty between them and the guardrail's base. With every plate laid down, the hall's sensor beeped a touch faster, like the heartbeat of someone climbing stairs without meaning to. The pastor, always at the fence, hat to his chest, repeated with his mouth barely open, "With respect, with respect, with respect." And the yard seemed to like the word. The herpetology team did their work, probing with cameras through old drain holes, tubes set up as dead ends, boxes with scent baits in likely passages. A sack of feathers and rodent smell went beside the eaves, in the shade of the lemon tree where the cottonmouth had disappeared days earlier. McDougal ran his hook slowly through the wall's stone gaps, the metal scratching the silence like a sawtooth. Nothing bit, nothing fled. "He feels the day," McDougal said, eyes still on the eaves. "Anything living in an old corridor learns to follow the ground's clock, and our clock is noisy." By noon, the anomaly map was completely ringed with plates, and the guardrail's hall felt like a drum with a thick hide, ready for a beat no one wants to hear. The agent gave the order I, tired idiot, wanted her to give, break, because even fear needs water. It was in that break that the yard opened its mouth. First came a sound like thick wind, like a tall dump truck rolling down a dirt road, but there was no road, no truck. The air between the headstones shimmered like heat over a pot. Then under our feet, from O'Rourke to the mausoleum's edge, ran a vibration that didn't feel like walking. It felt like stretching. The corridor stretched beneath us. The hall's sensors chirped in sequence, drawing on the text tablet, 3 peaks, 6 seconds, 3 peaks, 6, 3, 6. The geophysicist who'd spent a lifetime reading noise say, "Here's a brick," stood with his mouth open. Alvarez, the young biologist, caught my eyes and offered his, fear, in both. "He's calibrating with the surface," he said, almost happy the way scientists get when dread becomes data. No one told us to, but we all went silent. And it was in that helmeted silence that we heard a new sound join the old conversation, fine drops. 1, 2, 3. I looked to the side stained glass window. Water was running along the stone's edge, but the sky held no clouds. The tech pointed, condensation. The pastor murmured, an answer. I thought, sweat. The agent gave the signal, no heroics. Leave slowly. Gate closed. External watch. A heavy report sent to someone who likes to solve cemeteries in Excel. We obeyed. We stood outside the fence, all eyes fixed on one point, the shadow of the Gartrell. The swamp fog rose 2 inches, like a tide without a sea. 3 vultures traced the distant sky. The pastor breathed with his hand on his chest, short rhythm, like someone learning again to use a lung. The town, a few kilometers away, made its usual noise. Here, none. "Luke," Denise called me over the radio, her voice with the zipper open. "The administrator wants to know if you authorize moving the remains from section G3 to a safe perimeter. If you say yes, we'll get a judge's order for temporary removal." I looked at the stones, at the names of those who hadn't asked me for anything. I wanted to say yes, to pull from the ground those who didn't need to need this. Before I could decide, the corridor answered for me. Beneath the same 3 headstones that had answered yesterday, O'Rourke, Brodie, Reeves, came the trio of knocks, but not as a warning, as a refusal. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, then the sigh, long, full, coming from the base of the mausoleum, like someone who doesn't want to fight, only to say no. No, Denise, I said quietly, like speaking at a wake. Not today. No one moves. Close it off, yes. Removal, no. Not yet. She accepted with a copy that was half relief, half debt. The rest of the afternoon became cleanup. Cones, tape, locks, big signs. The works crew left with a nearly childlike relief. The herpetologists left behind 2 windowed boxes, bait inside, in case the corridor decided to bring into the yard what it didn't want to keep in its belly. The geophysicist, defeated, promised to send maps and hyperbolas. The pastor handed me a folded paper with old handwriting, a prayer he no longer remembers the origin of, and told me not to pray, to remember. I was alone at last, leaning on the iron fence, the sun melting behind the cedar line. The Gartrell was quiet again, or pretending. I took the 1919 photo from my pocket. The men in suspenders, the child staring at the lens, the note, inaugurated over the old corridor. I wanted to believe we're smarter now. I knew we aren't. I was about to leave when it went fully dark, and the town, innocent, lit its dinner lights. The yard, on this side, decided to make its final gesture. With the confidence of something night understands, the breath rose. It didn't break lids, didn't humiliate the plates. It rose where it always does, from beneath. Gliding under the stones, touching the hall, brushing the stained glass from within, making the plastic tape tremble like a tired tongue. The radio on my belt switched off, vibrated with 3 dry clicks no battery could explain. I laughed because laughing keeps fear from becoming superstition. I know, I repeated in a voice of respect. I know you're alive. The corridor answered with what it knows how to say, 3 knocks. And in the dust inside the stained glass, which my flashlight caught by accident, I saw the drawing that closes this account, the 8. Whole, and a thin arrow pointing north, toward the swamp, as if marking the way home. In the report I sent to the county, I wrote what fits on paper. Unstable subsurface, presence of cavities, risk of subsidence. Recommendation, permanent closure until superior technical review. I didn't write serpent. I didn't write custom. I didn't write breath. Those words I kept in my mouth. If you ask me today what's beneath St. Barrow Cemetery, I answer without theatrics. A corridor that doesn't want to die, that has learned the rhythm of our machines, that returns our weight in 3 knocks and breathes when we speak. Maybe it's a single creature, maybe a lineage, maybe it's a myth that grew muscle, maybe it's muscle the town calls a myth so it can sleep. What I know is simple. Beneath the cemetery, a serpent still breathes, and every plate, every slab, every foam only teaches the path it already knew. When I got home, the ceiling popped 3 times. Could be the wood, could be the corridor telling me good night. I lay down without pressing my ear to the pillow, slept on my side, eyes on the door, breathing slowly, trying not to mark the rhythm. Subscribe to Serpent Shadows and hit the bell. The next accounts are already crawling through the cracks.